She always tried to stay unnoticed. It wasn't that she disliked people. She just never felt like she belonged in busy places where everyone talked loudly, laughed loudly, and moved with confidence. She liked quiet corners, windows with sunlight, and the simple comfort of knowing no one expected anything from her. That was the kind of day it was when she followed her older sister to the music academy. She had been there a few times before, but only as someone waiting in the hallway while others practiced. She had never taken a class, never touched an instrument, and never even thought she would be allowed to. She was only there because her sister didn't like walking alone, and the long ride to the academy made both of them feel safer when together. The moment they stepped inside, the sound of instruments filled the halls. Violins were warming up on one side, a group of singers were practicing scales on the other, and somewhere deeper inside the building, a grand piano was playing a piece she didn't know the name of, but she could feel its emotion brushing against her chest. She paused for a moment, listening quietly before her sister nudged her to keep moving. They walked down the long corridor until they reached the classroom. Her sister went inside, greeted everyone, and took her usual place. She stayed outside, as she always did, sitting on a small bench. She didn't bring a book, so she simply watched people pass by. A boy rushed by with his flute case swinging at his side. A group of adults carrying heavy speakers hurried past, and a pianist she had heard about once walked through with a tired but focused expression. Everything seemed to move with purpose except her. After half an hour, she grew restless. Her legs felt stiff from sitting still. The bench was hard, and the hallway lights buzzed softly. She stood up, stretched, and walked slowly down the hallway, not to snoop around, but simply to move. She wasn't supposed to go far, but she had walked this hallway so many times that nothing felt strange or forbidden as she walked. She peeked through open doors. One room held a group of children learning rhythm with sticks. Another room had two guitarists practicing with their teacher. She watched for a few seconds, smiling at how they tried so hard to follow the beat. Everyone seemed to have something they were learning. She wondered what it felt like to be good at something, anything. She didn't think she had any special talent. She didn't even know if she wanted one. She just knew she liked listening. She continued down the hallway until she reached a larger door at the end. She recognized it as the main rehearsal hall, where professional artists often practiced. She never approached it before. It felt like a place she didn't belong. But today, the door wasn't fully closed. It sat slightly open, as if someone rushed out and forgot to shut it properly. A faint breeze from inside pushed warm air into the hallway. Curiosity tugged at her, just a little. She wasn't trying to intrude. She only wanted to take a quick look inside. She gently pushed the door open another inch and peeked in. The hall was huge, much bigger than she imagined. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, lighting up the polished wooden floor. Music stands and chairs were arranged in neat rows, and at the center of the room stood something she had seen only in pictures, a black grand piano, shiny and elegant, almost unreal in its beauty. She stepped inside without realizing it. The silence of the empty hall surrounded her. It felt different from the hallway silence. This silence felt warm, like the room was holding its breath. She took a few slow steps forward, drawn to the piano the way a child is drawn to something they've always wanted to see up close. She stopped halfway to the piano, unsure if she should continue. She looked around again. No one was there. She wasn't sure if the room was locked earlier, or if the artists were on a break. She knew she shouldn't touch anything. She wasn't a student. She didn't even know how to play. But something in her chest pulled her forward gently. She approached the piano until she stood right beside it. The lid was closed, but the keyboard cover was open, revealing the smooth white and black keys. She reached a hand toward them and pulled it back quickly. She was scared, not of getting in trouble, but of doing something wrong to such a perfect instrument. She stepped back slightly and let out a small breath. Her heart beat faster, though she didn't understand why. Maybe it was the idea of touching something she never imagined she could. Maybe it was the thought that this moment wouldn't come again. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she couldn't name. Without thinking too much, she slowly reached out again. Her fingertips touched one of the white keys with the lightest pressure. A soft, pure sound rose into the air, echoing gently around the empty hall. She froze. It wasn't loud, but it felt powerful because she had never created a sound like that before. She pulled her hand back again, staring at the key as if it had done something unexpected. She looked around once more. Still no one. She placed her finger on another key, a higher one, and pressed gently. Another note filled the room. Then she tried a lower key. She didn't know anything about music theory, but she could hear the way the sounds rose and fell. She pressed another, then another, exploring like someone discovering a new world. Soon she used both hands, not pressing anything complicated, just simple single notes. Each one felt like a small discovery. She moved slowly along the keyboard, amazed by how different each note felt. Some sounded warm, some sharp, some deep, and some bright. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing steadied. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about how she looked or whether someone would judge her. She was simply lost in the sound. She tried pressing two keys together. The sound changed, richer and fuller. She repeated it with different keys. Sometimes it sounded good, sometimes strange, but she kept experimenting. She wasn't trying to play music. She was trying to understand it. After a few minutes, her fingers moved more freely. She wasn't afraid anymore. She didn't have to think about each step. She allowed her fingers to wander, touching keys that felt right to her. She didn't know if she was playing something real, but the way the sounds blended together made her chest feel warm, like the music was answering something inside her. She pressed a sequence of keys slowly, and something about it made her stop. She repeated it. Then she changed the final note. She didn't know why, but the second version felt better. She tried playing it again, this time adding a soft note in between. The hall echoed softly, almost like it was listening. She kept going, building a simple pattern without planning it. She didn't know she was creating something that had emotion, something that sounded like a memory or a quiet dream. She didn't know she was doing something most people trained years for. She only knew that each sound she made felt like it belonged, and that feeling guided her more than any thought. She was so focused that she didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching the hall. She didn't hear the door open a little wider. She didn't hear the quiet voice whisper, "Is someone inside?" She continued playing, her face calm, her eyes lowered, her fingers lightly dancing across the keys. She still didn't know anyone was there. To her, she was alone in the quietest, warmest place she had ever known. Outside the doorway, a man who had come back early from break stopped moving. He listened, confused at first, thinking one of the professionals had returned ahead of schedule. But the melody didn't sound practiced or rehearsed. It sounded pure, as if someone were discovering music for the first time in the most natural way. Something about it sent a chill through him. He didn't step inside right away. He just listened. Back at the piano, she paused for a moment, then pressed another soft note. She didn't know the man behind her was smiling in disbelief. She didn't know the room that was supposed to intimidate her was becoming the place where her very first musical moment was happening. She didn't know she had already changed the way one person heard the piano. She simply kept playing, unaware that this moment, this quiet, innocent moment, would soon open a door she never knew existed. She did not know how long she had been touching the keys. Time inside the hall felt different, almost slower, as if every new sound she created held her attention completely. She kept exploring the keys in front of her, sometimes repeating the same notes, sometimes pressing them in a new order, just to hear what would happen. She wasn't trying to make anything fancy. She was simply following what felt right. She still had no idea someone was in the doorway watching her. The man stood there silently, not because he wanted to hide, but because he didn't want to break the fragile moment unfolding in front of him. He had taught dozens of students over the years. He had seen talent that made him proud, talent that needed shaping, talent that needed time. But what he heard now didn't fit into any of those categories. It wasn't polished or trained, but it had a strange emotional honesty that no beginner should have been able to reach. It was raw, unfiltered, and strangely beautiful. He waited for her to finish whatever she was trying to discover. But the more he listened, the more he realized she wasn't playing a song she knew. She was creating something. Her hands moved carefully, sometimes pausing to think, sometimes following an invisible thread her mind seemed to understand even if she didn't dot at one point. She pressed a combination of notes that blended in a way she didn't expect. She looked a little startled, almost as if she had stepped on something sharp, then pressed the same set of notes again, slower this time. The man watching leaned slightly forward. That tiny change, that curiosity, reminded him of students who had the gift of instinct. She kept going, experimenting with sounds that rose and fell gently. After a while, her shoulders relaxed more and her breathing became steady. It was as if the piano understood her, as if it was guiding her instead of the other way around. She finally lifted her hands from the keys and let the last note fade into the quiet room. She looked at the piano, not proud, not amazed, just thoughtful. Then she softly tapped one more key, almost absent-mindedly, like someone concluding a quiet conversation. That was the moment the man chose to move. He took a small step inside the hall. The sound of his shoe brushing against the floor made her jump. She jerked her hands away from the keys and turned sharply toward the doorway. Her eyes widened the moment she saw him. He didn't walk closer right away. He didn't want her to feel scared. He simply raised one hand a little, as if to show he meant no harm. She stood up quickly, almost knocking the bench backward. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words got stuck in her throat. She didn't know what to say, only that she must have done something wrong by touching something she wasn't supposed to. The man gave her a gentle smile. "It's all right," he said in a calm, warm voice. "You don't have to be afraid." She still felt nervous. Her fingers curled into her palms. She wondered if he was going to report her to the director or tell her sister that she had wandered into a room she wasn't allowed in. He took another slow step forward. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said softly. "I just heard something unusual." She didn't respond. She was still deciding whether she should run out of the hall or stay where she was. He pointed slightly toward the piano. "You were the one playing?" She looked at the ground and nodded once, barely lifting her chin. "I see," he said with a thoughtful sigh, as if something made sense to him now. "How long have you been playing?" She shook her head. I don't play," she whispered. "You don't?" He asked gently. "No," she said, her voice quiet. "I've never touched a piano before today." He blinked slowly, trying to understand. "Never?" She shook her head again. The man stared at the piano for a moment, then back at her. There was no frustration in his expression, no anger, no disbelief that made her feel judged. There was only curiosity and a hint of amazement. He walked slowly to the piano, as if approaching something delicate. Then he sat down on the bench and placed his hands on the keys. She watched him from a few steps away, unsure if she should stay or leave. Her feet felt glued to the floor. He pressed a few notes, the same notes she had played earlier. She recognized the sound immediately. It was the little pattern she'd stumbled upon by accident. The one that made her pause because it had felt like it meant something. "You played this," he said quietly. Letting the soft notes echo, she nodded slowly, feeling more nervous with each passing second. He looked up at her. "How did you think of it?" "I didn't think," she murmured. "I just followed the sound." He took in her words, studying her face for a moment. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to act humble. She was simply telling the truth. He stood up from the bench and motioned toward the piano. "Would you try again?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Every part of her wanted to refuse. She felt exposed, as if he had seen a part of her. She didn't even understand herself. But there was something about his voice that didn't feel demanding. It felt encouraging. She walked slowly toward the piano and sat down on the bench again. Her fingers hovered above the keys, nervous all over again. She pressed one note, then another, but her hands felt stiff this time. She wasn't relaxed like before. She kept glancing at him, afraid she might disappoint him. He noticed her tension. "It's all right," he said softly. "Just do what you did earlier. Don't think. Just listen." She took a slow breath and looked at the keys again. She pressed one note lightly, then another. She let the sound guide her the way it had before. After a few seconds, the pattern returned, and her hands began moving more naturally. Finally, she got lost in the sound again. The man closed his eyes as he listened. He wasn't focusing on the technique, because she had none. He was listening to the emotion, the purity, the sincerity behind every note. He had heard thousands of performances in his life. None had sounded like this. She continued playing until she reached the final soft note. Then she pulled her hands away, breathing a little heavier than before. She looked up at the man, waiting for any sign of his reaction. He opened his eyes slowly. "You have something rare," he said quietly. She frowned a little, confused. "I don't understand." "You don't need to yet," he replied. "But you should know. Not everyone can make a piano sound the way you just did." She shook her head quickly. "I wasn't doing anything special. I was just touching keys." He smiled in a gentle, almost proud way. Sometimes the ones who don't try to sound special are the ones who sound the most real. She looked down at her hands, unsure how to respond. She still felt like she had done something wrong, but now a small part of her wondered if she hadn't. Maybe she had simply done something unexpected. He stepped toward the door. "Stay here for a moment," he said. "I'll be right back." Before she could ask why, he left the hall quietly. She sat on the piano bench alone again, confused. She didn't know what he was going to do or who he was going to bring. She only knew that she suddenly felt very small in the huge room. Meanwhile, the man walked down the hallway with purpose in his steps. He needed others to hear what he had just heard. Not to show her off, not to put her under pressure, but because he realized something important. Moments like this didn't happen often. He wanted others to witness it, not for fame, but for the pure magic he had stumbled upon. Back in the hall, she waited nervously, unaware that her quiet moment of curiosity was already beginning to change more than she ever expected. She stayed seated on the piano bench, her hands resting in her lap, trying to calm the nervous feeling growing inside her. The hall felt too big all of a sudden. She wished she could slip out quietly before the man returned, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a tiny bit of hope she didn't want to admit to herself. She glanced at the doorway every few seconds, wondering who he was bringing back. She didn't know his role in the academy, but she could tell he was someone respected. The way he listened, The way he spoke, the way he looked at the piano, none of it felt casual. It made her feel even more uneasy. She had only wanted to touch the piano once, to see what it felt like. She had never imagined someone would hear her. As she waited, she placed one hand lightly on the keys again, not to play, but just to feel them. Her fingers shook slightly. She didn't want anyone to think she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. She didn't know anything about music. She didn't even know the names of the keys. All she had was the memory of how the sounds made her feel, and she wasn't sure if that was enough. The hallway outside grew quieter for a moment, and then she heard footsteps. At first it sounded like two people, but then she heard more, a soft shuffle, another set of shoes, voices whispering. Her heartbeat quickened. She sat up straight and pulled her hands away from the keys, as if they were hot. A man walked in first, holding the door open. Behind him came 4 other people. 2 carried instrument cases. One was holding a notebook, and another looked like he had just come from a rehearsal. They all had the same curious, slightly confused expressions, as if they weren't sure why they had been called there. She wanted to shrink into the bench and disappear. She couldn't imagine why anyone would need to watch her. She didn't understand what the man had told them. He turned to the group and spoke in a low voice. She couldn't hear everything, but she heard him say, "Just listen first." They nodded, still unsure. Then he walked over to her. His expression was calm, patient. "Don't be afraid," he said gently. "Just play the way you played earlier." Her breathing grew uneven. She shook her head. I can't do it with people here," she whispered. "I know it feels scary," he replied. "But don't think of them as an audience. Think of them as people who just want to hear something honest." "I don't know how to play anything," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That's the part that makes this special," he said softly. "You're not trying to play. You're just letting the sound guide you. Trust that." She looked at the keys again. Her hands felt heavy now. The room felt twice as large, and every eye on her felt like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. He stepped back to give her space, but stayed close enough so she didn't feel abandoned. The room grew silent. She took a slow breath. Then another. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She pressed one note, a small, simple one. It echoed gently. That little sound gave her the strength to press another. Then another. Slowly, she allowed herself to fall back into the pattern she had created earlier. At first, her hands were stiff and uncertain. The notes felt harder, less smooth. But as she kept playing, the edges of her fear softened. Her fingers began moving with the same natural ease she had shown when she thought she was alone. The people standing behind her exchanged puzzled looks. A few of them leaned slightly forward, drawn in by the softness of the melody. They weren't hearing a trained performance. They were hearing something that felt almost like a voice, quiet, unguarded, emotional. She kept going, letting the rhythm guide her. The notes rose and fell gently, carrying a kind of innocence that none of them had heard before. She didn't try to make it impressive. She didn't try to show skill she didn't have. Everything she played came from instinct, from a place inside her that had no name. One of the listeners, a violinist with years of experience, blinked slowly as he listened. He whispered to the person beside him, "She's never played before?" The man who brought them nodded slightly. The violinist shook his head in disbelief. The person holding the notebook scribbled something quickly, unable to hide how moved they were by the sound. Another person, a singer from the academy, covered her mouth gently, overwhelmed by the purity of the emotion. But the girl at the piano didn't notice any of that. She was lost in her own world again, the same world she had slipped into before she realized anyone was watching. She reached the final note and let it ring out softly. When it faded, the room stayed silent. She kept her hands frozen above the keyboard, for a long second before pulling them back slowly. Her stomach tightened with fear. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't want to see their faces. She didn't want to know what they thought. The silence stretched a little longer than she could handle. Finally, she forced herself to look over her shoulder. The first thing she saw was their expressions, not judgmental, not disappointed, but stunned. Truly stunned. As if they had heard something impossible, the man who had brought them stepped closer. His voice was soft, steady. That's what I wanted them to hear. One of the artists stepped forward next, speaking carefully. How long have you been learning? He asked. She shook her head. I don't learn, she said quietly. I've never taken a class. The group exchanged looks again. This time, with deeper amazement, another person spoke up, a woman with a warm voice. Who taught you to listen like that? No one, she whispered. I just followed the sound. The man who brought them folded his arms thoughtfully. That's what makes it remarkable. The girl slowly stood from the bench, unsure if she should stay or run. She felt exposed in a way she had never felt before. She didn't know what they wanted from her. The violinist approached her gently. Can you try something else? He asked. Anything. It doesn't have to be planned. She shook her head quickly. I don't know anything else. The man stepped in before she grew more uncomfortable. Let her rest, he said firmly. She's already done enough. The others respected his words. She looked at him, feeling a small sense of relief. He nodded reassuringly. You did well, he said softly. She lowered her gaze, unsure how to accept the compliment. She had never imagined adults experienced artists would speak to her this way. The man motioned to one of the listeners. Could you go find the director? He asked quietly. Her eyes widened. No, she whispered quickly. Please don't do that. He looked at her gently. Don't be afraid. No one wants to get you in trouble. I just think he should know what you're capable of. I'm not capable of anything, she insisted. I was only touching keys. I didn't mean to interrupt anyone. You didn't interrupt, he said firmly. And you're capable of more than you know. The person he had sent nodded and left the hall in a hurry. The remaining listeners stayed quiet, as if they understood the seriousness of the moment. They didn't speak loudly. They didn't move much. They just waited. She felt her hands shaking again. She took a step back from the piano, wanting to put some distance between herself and all the attention. The man walked over to her slowly. Take a breath, he said gently. You're safe. We're just here to understand, not to judge. She nodded weakly. Though she still felt overwhelmed, the others looked around the hall with expressions she couldn't read, part admiration, part disbelief, and part something she didn't yet understand. They weren't looking at her like she had broken a rule. They were looking at her like she had revealed something hidden. She wrapped her arms around herself lightly, unsure what would happen next. She wished her sister were there, but she also didn't want anyone she knew to witness this strange moment. It felt too fragile, too personal. The footsteps returning in the hallway warned her before she saw the person arrive. The director entered the room with a puzzled look, wondering why he had been called so suddenly. He noticed the group gathered near the piano. Then he noticed her. He looked at the man who had brought everyone. What's going on? He asked. The man gestured toward her with a gentle nod. Just listen, he said. And in that moment, she realized her quiet, hidden world was about to open even wider than she could have imagined. The hall felt strangely quiet long after the last note faded. People stood around talking in low voices, trying to understand what had just happened. She had played only one short piece, yet it felt like she had shaken something awake inside everyone who heard her. Some were excited, others confused, a few emotional for reasons they did not fully understand. she didn't stay to watch their reactions. After leaving the stage, she walked straight into a small side corridor behind the curtains. Her steps were shaky, and she had to press her hand to the wall to steady herself. She had played the piano before once or twice in her life, randomly pressing keys at someone's house, but what happened on that stage felt nothing like those moments. What she heard just now had not come from her mind. It had come from somewhere deeper. She lowered herself onto a wooden bench near the backstage exit, trying to catch her breath. A man carrying microphone stands hurried past her, barely noticing her. A few helpers rushed around, preparing for the next performance, but she sat still, lost in her own thoughts. Her hands were trembling. She turned them over in the dim light, staring as though they belonged to someone else. What did I just do? She whispered to herself. She tried to replay the performance in her mind. She remembered walking out, sitting down, touching the keys, and then everything blurred. She didn't remember choosing notes or thinking about tempo or rhythm. It was as if a door had opened inside her and music poured out on its own. The curtain behind her rustled, and the hall's stage manager stepped in. He had a clipboard under his arm and looked like someone who had spent years keeping events running smoothly. Usually he had a strict expression, but now he looked puzzled. "There you are," he said gently. "They're asking for you out there." Her eyes widened. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" He let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Wrong? You brought the hall to a standstill." He paused and leaned against the wall. "Listen, I've worked here for 20 years. I've seen some amazing performers walk across that stage. But the way those people reacted to you, let's just say it's rare." "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "You didn't," he said. "They just want to talk to you." But she didn't move. The thought of going back in front of all those people made her chest tighten. "I don't know what to say to them." The manager studied her for a long moment, as if trying to figure out a mystery. "You know," he said quietly, "most people spend years training to do what you just did. They practice until their hands hurt, until they can hardly stand. But the music you played, it wasn't about technique. It felt honest, real." He stood up straight. "Take a moment. When you're ready, someone will come get you." He walked away, leaving her alone again. She leaned back, closing her eyes. She didn't feel proud. She didn't feel excited. What she felt was an overwhelming mix of relief and confusion. It was like something inside her finally found a voice after hiding for years. But she had no idea what that voice wanted to say. A soft sound pulled her out of her thoughts. Footsteps slow, approaching with caution. She looked up and saw a woman walking toward her. She looked older, dressed in a long dark coat, her hair tied back neatly. She moved with the calm confidence of someone used to seeing extraordinary things. "May I sit?" the woman asked. She nodded, sliding slightly to the side. The woman sat next to her, folding her hands on her lap. For a moment she didn't speak. She simply took a slow breath, as though choosing her words with care. "I was in the audience when you played," the woman said quietly. "I came tonight expecting to listen to many talented performers. I didn't expect that." The girl swallowed, unsure how to respond. "What's your name?" the woman asked gently. She told her. "Well," the woman said, "you may not know this, but many of the people who are watching you tonight spend their entire lives perfecting their craft. Some travel around the world, giving performances in concert halls most people only see in pictures." She paused. "And yet, when you played those few minutes, you silenced them." "I didn't even know what I was doing," she whispered. "I just played. That's why it felt different," the woman replied. There was something in the woman's eyes, an understanding, maybe even a bit of awe. It made the girl feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. "Can I ask you something?" The woman continued. She nodded. "When you sat at that piano, what did you feel?" She thought for a long moment. "It felt like the room disappeared. Like I wasn't even playing. Something else was moving my hands." She turned to the woman. "I don't understand it." The woman offered a small, soft smile. "Some people spend decades chasing a moment like that. A moment where music becomes more than sound, where it becomes truth." The girl lowered her eyes. Unsure how to absorb such words, another voice approached from behind the curtain. A tall man stepped into the corridor, the same man who had reacted most strongly during her performance. He looked like someone who had spent a lifetime around instruments, someone who could hear beauty even in a single note. When he saw her sitting there, something softened in his expression. "There you are," he said. "We've been looking for you." She stood up quickly, nervous again. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble." "Trouble?" he said, raising his eyebrows. "If anything, you reminded us what real music feels like." He took a slow breath. "May we talk somewhere quieter?" The woman rose as well. "I'll leave you to it," she told the girl softly. "We'll speak again." The man led her down the hallway to a smaller practice room. It held only a single upright piano and a few chairs. The lighting was soft, almost comforting. He closed the door behind them and turned to her. "I need to ask you something. When did you learn to play?" "I never did," she said honestly. "I mean, I touched a piano once or twice, but I never practiced. I don't know how to read music." He stared at her, stunned. Then he laughed quietly, almost in disbelief. "That makes no sense," he said. "The way you played out there, it wasn't random. It wasn't guessing. You were forming melodies, building patterns, shaping emotion. That doesn't happen by accident." "I don't know how to explain it," she whispered. He walked toward the piano in the corner and lifted the lid. "Would you try again?" Fear shot through her. I don't think I can." "That's all right," he said. "No pressure. Just touch the keys. See if anything comes." She hesitated. Her hands hung by her side, cold and still. The memory of the stage felt too intense, too raw. But a part of her small, fragile, curious wondered if it would happen again. Slowly, she walked toward the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys. Nothing happened. For a moment, she felt relieved, then strangely disappointed. She pressed a single key, then another. Simple, scattered notes. Her hands did not move the way they had before. No melody rose from her fingers. She looked up, embarrassed. "I think maybe it was just luck." But the man stepped closer, shaking his head. "No, what you did wasn't luck. It was something real. But you weren't performing then. You were expressing something. Maybe right now you're trying too hard." He tapped the top of the piano gently. Music comes when the heart calls it, not when the mind demands it. She let out a shaky breath. The room felt warm and quiet. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to listen to herself, to the silence, to whatever had moved her before. But the stillness inside her didn't break. "I'm sorry," she said softly, stepping back from the piano. He didn't look disappointed. Instead, he looked reflective, almost thoughtful. "There's something inside you," he said. "Something rare. And whether it appears again tomorrow or years from now, it's still there." She swallowed hard, unsure whether his words comforted or overwhelmed her. Someone knocked on the door. A staff member poked his head inside. "They're asking for her again. The audience is still waiting." She froze. "They want me to go back?" "Yes," the staff member said. "They're calling for you." The man turned to her. "You don't have to play again. They just want to see you." To thank you. Her breathing quickened. She didn't know if she could face that many people again. I'm not ready. He studied her face, then nodded. All right. You don't need to go back out there. Not tonight. Relief washed over her, but it was mixed with something else, something like guilt. The man stepped toward her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Listen, what you gave them tonight was more than enough. And what you gave yourself. He paused. That might be even more important. She couldn't explain why, but tears filled her eyes. Maybe it was the pressure finally lifting, or the strange kindness of these people who barely knew her. Maybe it was the confusing feeling of discovering something inside herself she never knew existed. She wiped her eyes, quickly. What do I do now? For tonight? He said with a soft smile. You rest. Tomorrow. We'll see. She nodded, letting the words settle. For the first time since stepping onto the stage, she felt a quiet sense of peace. Not complete understanding, not even close, but a gentle acceptance that something extraordinary had happened. And she didn't have to figure out everything right away. As she left the room and walked toward the backstage exit, she heard faint applause still echoing from the hall. Even though she wasn't there to hear it fully, people were calling her name. But for now, she just wanted the cool night air, a quiet street, and a moment to breathe. She stepped outside, feeling lighter with every breath. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if her gift would return, but deep. The next morning came quietly. She woke up before the sun had fully risen, feeling the same strange mixture of calm and uncertainty that had followed her home the night before. Her little room was silent, except for the soft hum of traffic outside. She sat up slowly, letting the memories of the performance settle in her mind again. She still couldn't fully believe what had happened. She had gone to the event expecting to sit in the back, maybe help a friend carry something, maybe watch a few performances. She never imagined sitting in front of an audience, let alone playing in a way that would leave trained artists silent. She stood and walked over to the small window. Outside, a few early birds were already busy, people opening shops, sweeping sidewalks, delivering bread. Life looked normal, ordinary, but she didn't feel ordinary anymore. Something inside her had changed, even if she didn't yet understand what that change meant. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from the event organizers. We hope to see you again today. No pressure. Just come by if you can. She stared at the message for a long moment, unsure how to respond. But something in her heart nudged her gently forward. By mid-morning, she found herself walking toward the music hall again. The building looked the same as always, tall glass doors, clean steps, big posters showing the performers for the event. But she felt different walking through those doors. As she entered, a young member of the staff spotted her and rushed over. There you are, the staff member said with a bright smile. Everyone's been asking if you'd come. She felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to people looking for her. She followed the staff member through the hallway toward the same backstage area from the night before. There were more people there today, some tuning instruments, some discussing schedules, some sipping coffee. When she appeared, several of them turned to look. Their expressions were warm, surprised, even excited. A few nodded respectfully, and one whispered to his friend, "That's her." She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She lowered her gaze and offered a small smile to anyone who approached. The man who had spoken with her last night appeared from one of the side rooms. He looked relieved when he saw her. "I'm glad you came," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted. "You should," he replied gently. "But only if you want to." He led her to a quiet corner away from the noise. "There's something I'd like to talk about," he said. "After last night, a few people have been asking about you." They want to know where you studied, who taught you, how long you've been playing. She looked down. I didn't study anywhere. I know, he said. And I didn't tell them anything. That's your story to share. Or not share. She took a deep breath. I'm worried they'll think I'm lying. Or that I'm pretending. People fear what they don't understand, he said thoughtfully. But they also admire it. What you did yesterday. It was rare. But rarity can confuse people as much as it amazes them. She folded her hands tightly. I don't want people to expect things from me. He nodded. Then don't worry about expectations. You're not here to impress anyone. You're just here to discover what's inside you. She looked up slowly. Do you think I can really learn? I mean, properly learn? Of course, he said. And if what you showed yesterday is any sign, you'll learn faster than most. She hesitated. What if last night was the only time I could play like that? He smiled gently. Then it was still something beautiful. But I don't think it was the last. The calm in his voice settled her nerves a little. Just then, the older woman from the night before approached. She held a warm expression, as though she had expected the girl to return. I'm glad to see you again, the woman said softly. The girl nodded politely. We had a meeting earlier this morning, the woman said. A few of us talked about yesterday's performance, and we would like to offer you something. The girl blinked, surprised. Offer me what? The woman exchanged a glance with the man, who stepped back to let her speak. We would like to give you guidance, the older woman said. Not pressure, not demands, just support. You have something natural, something that cannot be taught. But you can learn the tools around it, the structure, the discipline, the language of music that will help you express what you feel. The girl didn't know how to react. Why me? Because we heard you, the woman said simply. And sometimes hearing is enough. She felt overwhelmed. Her hands trembled slightly. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. You don't need to be ready, the woman said. You just need to be open. The girl swallowed hard. She didn't want to disappoint them, but she also didn't want to lose herself in something she didn't understand. The man stepped in again. Let's take this one step at a time. For now, would you like to sit at a piano again? Not to perform, just to explore. Explore. The word felt gentle. Safe, Dot, she agreed. They led her to a smaller practice room, one she hadn't seen before. It had a grand piano pushed to the center, polished and beautiful, with sunlight shining across its lid. The room was warm and bright. Unlike the dim backstage area, Dot, she approached the piano slowly. Her heart beat softly inside her chest, not with fear, but with curiosity. Take your time, the man said, standing a respectful distance away. She sat down. The seat felt familiar now, almost comforting. She placed her hands lightly on the keys. The room went quiet. For a long moment, she didn't press anything. She just breathed. Then, gently, she played a single note. The sound filled the room, soft, warm, honest. Dot. She pressed another. And another. A tiny pattern formed, simple and unsure, like a child learning to speak. She didn't feel the same intensity as the night before, but she felt something else, something peaceful. A soft melody began to build, slow and imperfect, yet full of heart. The man listened silently. The woman closed her eyes, letting the sound settle. The notes weren't flawless, but they were real. Dot as she played. Something inside her unlocked, not a burst of power like the night before, but a small door opening quietly. She felt the music, not as a force taking over her, but as a gentle companion sitting beside her. She played for several minutes. When the melody ended, she lifted her hands slowly. She turned toward the two people watching. It wasn't like yesterday, she said softly. Dot. The man shook his head. It wasn't meant to be. The woman stepped forward. Music isn't always fire. Sometimes it's light. Sometimes it's breath. Yesterday, you gave the world fire. Today, you gave it something calm and honest. Both are beautiful. The girl looked down, a shy smile forming. The woman continued, "We don't want to change you. We just want to help you grow. If you choose this path, we will walk with you." She took a long breath. "If I say yes, what happens next?" The man answered, "You learn, slowly, at your pace. You don't owe anyone a performance. You just show up when you're ready. That's all." She looked at the piano again. Something inside her whispered yes, gently but clearly. "I want to try," she said softly. The woman reached out and squeezed her hand. "Then we'll begin." What followed were days that felt new and full of wonder. She returned to the hall again and again, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late in the afternoon. The musicians guided her patiently, showing her how to hold her hands, how to listen for patterns, how to feel rhythm inside her body. She learned slowly, but with deep curiosity. Some days she could barely play more than a few notes. Other days, a melody flowed easily, surprising even her. But no matter the day, she felt supported. She felt seen. Word of her talent spread quietly, but the people around her protected her privacy. They didn't push her to perform. They didn't put her on stage again. They simply let her grow. Weeks turned into months. Her confidence grew. Her understanding deepened. And though she never forgot the moment when she first shocked everyone with her sudden talent, she began to understand that true music wasn't about impressing a crowd, that it was about expressing something real. One evening, months later, she sat at the grand piano alone. The sun was setting, filling the room with soft gold. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move. A new melody came, gentle, emotional, full of life. She wasn't trying to recreate the magic of that first night. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just speaking with her heart. And somewhere in the hall, two people listened quietly from the doorway, smiling, grateful, proud. She had arrived as a girl who didn't know her own gift. She grew into someone who embraced it. And now, as her music filled the empty hall, it was clear that she wasn't done. This was only her beginning.